wonderful, but it can't be directed by our elected leaders. It can't be directed by the government. And she quoted in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus said, "Oh, you hypocrites who like to stand up and pray publicly, when you pray, you should go into your closet and pray in secret, and where your Father sees you in secret, and don't stand up like the hypocrites before everyone else." She even quoted that, saying there are some Christians who believe that the words of Jesus are important. It is a good decision, and not that we needed Jesus' endorsement for our lawsuit, but it does show that believers disagree with each other. And if they're going to have prayer, whose prayer is it going to be? And what business of the government is it to tell whose prayer it should be, or what Bible verse? In fact, the very fact that there's always been a Bible verse and not a reading from a Hindu holy book, right? Or from the Quran, the very fact that it's a Judeo-Christian thing shows you something. It shows that there are some people who think we are a Judeo-Christian nation. We never were. So, the problem that a lot of right-wing Christians have, and not all of them are bad. I know a lot of wonderful Christians who understand the principle. But the problem that a lot of these evangelical right-wing Christians have is that they can't distinguish between free speech and government speech. And there's a big difference. Free speech for you and me is unlimited. It's protected. We have free speech with a few little restrictions here and there, but generally we can say what we want when we want to. But government does not have free speech. The government's speech is restricted. It is limited. If you look at the First Amendment has been generally referred to as under this umbrella of the freedom of conscience. And there's 5 freedoms in the freedom of conscience. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and freedom to petition the government, right, for redress of grievances. We are guaranteed those freedoms. Those are hard-coded in the Constitution. No local majority can vote them away. We don't have majority rule on those issues. Those are part of America that there's no negotiation on, right? A city can't decide to kick out the publisher, the newspaper, can't go against free speech even if most people wanted to. There were counties and cities in the South who thought segregation was right because it was long tradition and the majority wanted it. And what right do outsiders have to come into my state and tell us how we can run our school system? Well, the right that the federal troops had to come in was based on the U.S. Constitution, which means some freedoms are guaranteed. So those 5 freedoms, at least, are guaranteed under our First Amendment. But notice something. Before those 5 freedoms are spelled out in the very First Amendment, the very first words of the First Amendment is not a freedom, it's a restriction. The very first words in the First Amendment say, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion." That's talking about government speech, not free speech. The government's hands are tied. The government cannot do anything respecting, which means leaning towards or dealing with an establishment of religion. And that doesn't mean just setting up a national church. It means anything that tends to prefer, and a lot of the Founding Fathers wrote about this in great detail, what that meant. So anytime the government directs Americans to engage in a private religious ritual, they are doing something respecting an establishment of religion. They are crossing the line. So that's where our group takes all of our lawsuits, basically. It's called the Establishment Clause. That Establishment Clause, we don't sue individuals. We don't run into churches and interfere with people's freedoms. We don't try to stop anybody. But what we do is we sue governments, from a high school principal to a governor to a mayor to the President of the United States in this case. When the government crosses the line, the government speech is restricted. And when it crosses that line, as the judge said, it's unconstitutional. It's going against what our Constitution allows. The day of the victory on April the 15th, it was really funny. That very day, the National Day of Prayer Task Force had a video on its website. What was the guy's name? Alan Sears? Is that his name? He was almost in tears. "They're taking away our freedoms. They don't want us to pray." And they had a picture of a Christian with his mouth duct taped like this. "They don't want us to pray." They totally missed it. And how we need to fight these people who are fighting our Christian heritage. And all of that was next to this huge donate button. And they have raised a lot of money on this. Of course they've raised a lot of money on this. Fight the atheists. Fight these people that are trying to corrupt America. When we think we're fighting for their freedoms too. We think when the government is neutral, we're all free. The problem is a lot of evangelicals or right-wing Christians don't know the difference between neutrality and hostility. They think neutrality is hostility. They think if we're asking the government to back off and be neutral, that's an attack against them, right? They view it that way. But how could they not? Jesus even had the same attitude, like a kind of a small-town cult leader. Jesus said, he that is not with me is against me, right? That's how they think. That's how the mind, you've got to be on my side or else you're my enemy. When actually a lot of Americans can be just neutral and they're not your enemy. It's just co-Americans with a different point of view. And we welcome your freedom. Go to church, have your rallies, wear your shirts, put up your nativity scenes, pray, do it, please. This is America. We're not interfering with that. We're not suing you people, but they all take it personally, like we're restricting them. Did you see the Fox interview I was on last Sunday? Did any of you see that?
Yeah.
That was really fun. I think since it was a Sunday, all the big guns were gone, so they gave it to this guy. And actually, I like him. He was very nice. He let me talk. I think he should be fired. He doesn't represent Fox's usual approach to interrupting and, you know what I mean? They gave him some talking points, which were stupid, but and he handled it. We actually had a conversation. But I tell you, it was like I had to get up at 5 in the morning, and they took this. I was down in Southern California, and they arranged it at the West LA studio. I took this limo, and it was fun. The limo driver was this Greek guy. When he found out what I was talking about, he started yelling and banging the dashboard. I thought he was mad at me. It turns out he's mad at religion. And he says, "Good for you, don't funnel back." So he sat outside while he was doing it. I was so sleepy. I was so exhausted from traveling and all this stuff that I fell asleep in the green room. And then the guy came and got me, and I got up, and there was Obama and McCain. But it was these cutouts. So it's really weird. If you've ever done a hookup TV show, it's really weird. You sit in this chair, and all you see is a camera. You don't see what's happening. You don't see the person. This camera had a little smiley face on, happy face on it, but and you have a little thing in your ear. You're listening to New York, and you're doing this interview, so you have to pretend like you're there with him, right? But I knew I had him when he said, "Mr. Barker, you do know, and you do agree that we are a Judeo-Christian nation, and our Constitution says that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights." So you all caught that mistake, right? And it was really fun to kind of educate the guy, and I didn't feel bad for him. I felt like here's a chance to learn something, you know. But then I got back in the car, and the cab driver now is going to join our group. He's just he's really a fun guy. He almost broke my ears yelling at me. So Obama appealed his loss, which means that we are going to go to Chicago to the 7th Circuit. The U.S. government wants to protect the National Day of Prayer. And I'm not going to guess what, if anything, is going through Obama's mind on this. Maybe he hasn't paid much attention to it, but the government is appealing it. And I think maybe, I'm an optimist, I'm hopeful. I'm thinking maybe Obama just wants to make it look like he was forced to stop. You know what I mean? Rather than him coming up and saying, "Yeah, I don't think we should pray either." If they can go through the motions, and even if they lose, even if we win, then it's like, well, don't blame me. I fought for prayer. So we're going to the 7th Circuit, which has been good to us in the past. In 2007, we were in the Supreme Court after the 7th Circuit gave us a real strong victory on our faith-based initiative lawsuit. And Judge Posner there, who's still there, a conservative appointed judge, he's probably the most quoted judge in the country. He handed down a really strong decision in favor of state church separation, in favor of our lawsuit. The government petitioned, and the Supreme Court took our case, and we lost on standing, not on the merits. We lost on the standing to sue George Bush over the faith-based initiative. And the court even said what Bush was doing might be wrong, but you don't have the right to take the lawsuit. That was what that whole thing was about. It's called Hein versus Freedom from Religion Foundation. But Posner gave a strong decision in our favor, and so we're going back to that court, 7th Circuit in Chicago. And it might be a year before it gets there. So Obama and